I am here with Geoff Stocking. He is a employee at the C.M. Russell Museum and part of the summer exhibition, ArtConnects, which is a partnership between C.M. Russell Museum staff and Great Falls Public Schools art faculty. So we're happy to highlight Geoff as another artist in our ongoing artist interviews for this exhibition. So Geoff, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the C.M. Russell Museum, as well as the work that you do as an artist.
My name is Geoff Stocking, and I am the senior preparator and exhibition designer at the Russell Museum. And I've been here for about 7 years now, or a little over 7 years. And essentially, I'm responsible for everything visual that happens in the galleries. So the design of the graphics, hanging up the artwork and lighting and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a fun job because, you know, as an artist, I get to like build things for my job and, you know, have a creative outlet in that same sense. So it's been fun. It's a good place. So I went to the University of Montana in Missoula and got my bachelor's of fine arts in painting and drawing. Kind of work I do as an artist, work mostly with acrylic paint and mixed with matte medium. I use a lot of pencil and colored pencil and like charcoal for the line work, and mixed medium. And then I always hand build my canvases, and mainly so I can control like the thickness and the depth of the canvas. And I've taken to using acrylic really because of the drying time. You know, as far as style of the paintings, I do a lot of work with the geometric shapes. Then I like to contrast that with organic shapes, kind of a play of like hard lines and soft lines. A lot of color theory and color relationships are important in the work. And so using those kind of contrasting things, playing around a lot with positive and negative spaces within the composition as well. And I guess I've always considered these paintings to be, I've always called them non-objective. So they're like abstract, but, you know, not necessarily an abstract representation of something. At the same time, I've considered the paintings that I do as much of an object as a two-dimensional painting, and that's part of the reason why I hand build the canvases and make them thicker, so that they stand off the wall, so that they actually become an object.
What inspires or influences the art that you make?
No, in college, I started making strictly just making sculpture. I've always been interested in like building things, making things, you know, and so I've always thought like for sculpture or objects in general, I've always been interested in that the space that those physical things take up, you know, and that as like a viewer, you not only look at a sculpture, you know, in an aesthetic sense, but you also have to like share your space with that thing and like in a way interact with it. And so I think that I wanted to bring that to my painting, you know, and so that's kind of where my paintings were born. This duality of like two seemingly opposite things, like form and function, right? Working together like seamlessly, I think is kind of a common thread. The duality is kind of a common thread in my work. I'm always kind of looking for like two colors that are right next to each other that are like really high contrast, or two shapes that are, you know, together that are um, seeming, they seem like they're opposite, but, working together. So that kind of stuff, things that are like organic and inorganic, simple and complex kind of shapes, architecture living in nature, and working together. I guess historically, I've, always been really interested and influenced by Joseph Albers and his work with color theory and color relationships. I've always loved those post-war artists like Richard Diebenkorn and Sean Scully and I like Donald Judd, for sculpture. And I guess I've always really been fascinated by artists that are able to create something just amazingly beautiful, something like super simple. This artist, John McCracken, that I've always really loved. Who knew you could, make this blue rectangle and lean it against a wall, and it just can be so like powerful and take over a space. Another thing that's influenced the application of my painting, the Italian Renaissance painters' use of like glaze
Right.
techniques to create like final colors, and that kind of really just makes up the basis of how I put paint on canvases. Um, Mixing like the acrylic paint, usually straight out of the tube, mixed with like matte medium, to create like really translucent thin glazes, and then just building those layers. In the end, then you're left with this color that is hard to achieve. I think hard to achieve with one layer of, or a couple layers of like opaque paint. I mean, just like thinking on some of those Renaissance paintings of Jesus on the cross, and like his skin is not just beige or like skin color. It's like there's a depth of green and orange and red and like all mixed together. I use a lot of that matte medium to it kind of gives it like an encaustic feel a little bit. But and I don't know a whole lot about encaustic, but like I don't. I know that you can, with encaustic, you can go back into it and scrape away, and so there's like an additive and subtractive process that is available there. But for me, like with acrylic paint, I don't have that ability to take away.
Mhm.
So everything is like super planned out.
What can you tell me about your creative process, and how do you go from start to finish on a work of art? And what is your conceptual process?
Creative process is always been a push and pull between my tendency to like want to control the final outcome of this thing with my desire to like be more free and loose and not so like strict about it. Again, that duality of two things that I'm kind of working through in creating those things. And so like my control side for these paintings, my control side says, you have to map everything out with math compositionally. And so like always use round numbers, and break things up into thirds and use your golden ratio and all that kind of stuff. And so then I have to allow myself to balance that out with some kind of like organic shapes, or like instead of drawing a line in there with a ruler, I allow myself to like hand draw it, which is just sloppy looking. But yeah, that creative process is always I always feel like I'm working through like like my own duality. I'm a Gemini, if you can't tell. It's like that push and pull between two like opposite sides. How they're actually created. I used to work a lot in a sketchbook. with technology now, I start everything on a computer. I draw, I, draw out the composition. I like doing it digitally because it allows me to you know, and delete things really quickly and easily. And so, I can get like general ideas of composition, and then once I have like the line work that I want to put on there, then I can block in colors, and if this color doesn't work with that color well, then I can make some or add some layers to that. So it is like for me like a sketchbook in a way, but just allows me to like add and delete really quickly. And then so like when I have those shapes and colors kind of planned out and mapped out, I work backwards. Like for example, if I have purple in this like one section, I know that I'm gonna be I'll have like you know alternating layers of translucent like 5 different blues alternating with 5 different reds. So that's my control side, right? And then like if that isn't getting the color that I want necessarily, then I'll throw something else in, and that's kind of like a little bit of freedom that I allow. There's kind of a recipe to it, but there's always something that's different, and it's I try to plan it out as much as possible, but there's always things like that you can't control, and so um, when those pop up, then it's um, kind of it is kind of freeing because then you have to like stop and try to figure it out and solve a problem and that kind of stuff. So um, no, it's interesting and fun and kind of an emotional journey. A lot of the
Yeah.
times, a lot of decision making that is fun. The geometric shapes that I use are never like closed, if that makes sense. Like there's never like a straight square on the canvas. Usually like one or two of those edges is off the canvas, right? I do a lot of like open shape. The idea with that is that paintings to feel like part of something larger, like that trapezoid in the right corner that's falling off the edge is really finished outside of the viewer's perspective. It allows me to like create these shapes that are not necessarily big, but if your mind finishes them, they can be like grand. Recently, I've been doing a lot of diptychs and triptychs to try to help help with that idea of following it to another object to maybe finish that shape.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to young people or aspiring artists?
I would say there's a couple things that come to mind. I've always been kind of a realist, especially since I've gotten into this profession. So I always try to be realistic when talking about being an artist or going into that life of being an artist. In a very gentle way, I try to say that it's difficult. It can be really hard to make a living at it. But if you're able to do that, then it can be like super rewarding. Not necessarily always like financially rewarding, but can be. For a lot of people, being an artist is something that they have to do. It's something that's like inside. To to that you have to like let out. If that's something that you're aspiring to be, then have um, something that supplements that. It's not a fallback, at all. My wife and I, she's a curator and an art historian, so we talk about this a lot. And like, if our kids want to be artists, would say that's awesome. That's great. I totally understand that. but but taking business classes is also a great supplement to that, because if you are going to be an artist, there's two sides of it in my mind. There's the creation of the piece, the artwork, right? The creation of it, the talent side of that. There's also a business side, and in many respects, you are trying to sell your work or your brand or whatever it is. And so having that business idea, is, to me, really should go hand in hand. Grant writing, if you become like a major artist that is not necessarily selling his work, or her work, sorry, then you're going to be looking for grants to like fund that stuff, right? So that can't hurt. There's something in people that drives them to be artists, and you need to follow that. And I would say too, and I think I consider myself lucky for sure to be in a position, in a job that allows me that creative outlet, and so look for that too. There's tons of jobs and careers out there that can fulfill that artistic need. Even in like places you wouldn't think. People are realizing, companies are realizing that that creative like problem solving that artists have to do to make their own work. That creative problem solving is a real skill that is super beneficial to any company. Any company that you wouldn't even think it would fit in. It's about being smart going into it, and knowing what it takes to actually be an artist.
Thank you for talking with me today and sharing information about the artwork that you do, as well as your job and how those two interact, because that's great for us to be able to share with our community. So I really appreciate you speaking about your artwork.